When the mighty Nyrax descended on Viridia, they expected an easy conquest. Instead, they awakened the ghosts of the jungle. Led by Jedediah Kane, a hardened xenobotanist turned relentless predator, a handful of human survivors turned the deadly planet itself into a weapon, striking from the shadows with poison, beasts, and pure human defiance. But as the alien invaders began to fall, a terrifying truth emerged: the Nyrax weren't conquerors. They were wardens. And humanity's war was about to unleash something far worse than occupation. Before we dive deeper into the story, please subscribe. It costs you nothing but helps stellar HFY a lot. The sky above Viridia tore open in streaks of violet fire. NYRA's drop pods screamed through the atmosphere like judgment from an angry god. Jedediah Kane lay flat against the damp earth of the Crimson Vale jungle, heart slamming against his ribs, old hunting rifle pressed tight to his shoulder. He had come to this remote colony to study its deadly beauty. Now that beauty was about to become their only weapon. Multiple contacts. They're everywhere. The desperate voice of a colonial militiaman crackled over the calm before it dissolved into static and screams. Orbital lances hammered down. The settlement of New Elysium disappeared in a blinding dome of plasma, 12,000 lives erased in seconds. Sleek obsidian landing craft settled among the burning ruins. From them emerged the Nyrax, towering 8-foot nightmares of chitin and glowing red ocular clusters, their segmented limbs clicking with mechanical precision. Their energy weapons sang a high, lethal note that turned flesh to vapor and bone to blackened glass. Jedediah's breath came shallow. Every instinct screamed to run. Instead, he waited in absolute stillness as a Nyrax patrol marched past, barely 10 meters away. Their armor hummed with power, sensors sweeping for heat and movement. A faint rustle. Whispervines, delicate bioluminescent creepers he had catalogued years ago, reacted to the disturbance. They burst open in silent clouds of neurotoxic spores. The lead alien staggered, claws frantically tearing at its helmet seals as the toxin ate through its filters. Its ocular clusters flickered wildly. Jedediah squeezed the trigger. 3 tungsten rounds punched through a vulnerable joint with wet cracks. The creature collapsed, screeching. Its squad opened fire instantly, vaporizing trees and igniting the canopy in roaring flames. He was already sliding down a root-choked ravine, heart pounding, branches whipping his face. Behind him, the jungle burned, but the fire couldn't chase him deep enough. By dawn, the colony was gone. Only 43 survivors reached the dripping cavern behind the roaring waterfall. Their faces were hollow with shock. Captain Elena Reyes, former militia commander, clutched a wounded arm and spat blood onto the stone floor. "We can't win a conventional fight," Jedediah said, voice low and gravelly. "They own the skies. They own technology. But they don't know the jungle. Not like I do." Reyes glared. "So we what? Hide and throw rocks? They'll glass the entire continent." Jedediah's eyes gleamed with cold determination. "No. We make every single step they take cost them dearly. We turn this planet into their worst nightmare. We become ghosts." That night they struck their first blow. Using deathcap fungi that released powerful hallucinogenic gas when crushed underfoot, they infiltrated the perimeter of a Nyrax forward base. The result was chaos. Alien warriors tore at each other in madness, armor slick with purple ichor as they fired wildly into their own ranks. Jedediah watched from the shadows as one Nyrax turned its energy blade on its own squad before collapsing in convulsions. The Ascendancy's response was immediate and brutal. Orbital strikes scorched massive swathes of jungle, turning vibrant green into blackened wasteland. But Viridia was ancient and resilient. By the next morning, aggressive new growth had already begun reclaiming the ashes, thicker, meaner, hungrier. The aliens had learned their first painful lesson: this planet fought back. Jedediah smeared luminescent sap across his face and arms, confusing alien thermal sensors. He moved like smoke between the trees, a former scientist now transformed into the tip of humanity's desperate spear. Every trap, every ambush, every dead Nyrax carried the same message carved into the jungle itself: you should never have come here. Yet in the deepest parts of the Crimson Vale, where even the survivors feared to tread, something ancient stirred. Something the Nyrax had come not to conquer, but to contain. With every explosion and every act of human defiance, tiny cracks were forming in a prison built long before humanity ever reached the stars. The jungle whispered warnings. Jedediah listened, and kept fighting. The jungle never slept, and neither did its ghosts. Jedediah Kane balanced 30 meters above the forest floor on a thick moss-covered branch, barely breathing through his rebreather. Below, a heavily armed Nyrax convoy rumbled along a freshly carved path, hover transports protected by hulking exosuits. Their sensors swept the darkness in relentless red beams, hunting the humans who had already claimed over 200 alien lives in just 6 brutal weeks. "Hold positions," he whispered into his throat mic, voice barely audible. Captain Reyes waited on the opposite ridge with their last functional rocket launcher. 28 hardened survivors, hunters, loggers, and desperate civilians, lay perfectly still along the kill zone, bodies pressed into the mud and roots. The lead transport triggered the first trap. Spine root vines erupted from the soil like living spears, their razor barbs punching straight through armored plating. Nyrax warriors spilled out, firing chaotically into the trees. That was when the howler monkeys began their assault. Jedediah had spent months studying the creatures. Their ultrasonic cries jammed Nyrax neural implants with devastating effect. The jungle filled with an invisible sonic storm. Aliens clutched their heads, dark blood leaking from ear slits as they staggered. Then the humans opened fire. Tungsten slugs and toxin-laced darts tore through the chaos. Jedediah dropped silently into their midst like a predator, combat knife flashing. He drove the blade deep beneath a mandible joint and twisted viciously. The warrior thrashed, nearly severing his arm with a dying swipe before going limp in a pool of ichor. "Extract now." Reyes barked over comms. They vanished into the green hell before reinforcements could arrive. No bodies. No evidence. Only blood, wreckage, and growing terror among the invaders. Back in the cavern base, tension hung thick as the humid air. Supplies were nearly exhausted. Young Miko, a teenage survivor badly burned in the last bombing, winced as Jedediah applied a fresh poultice of silverfin paste, Viridia's natural antibiotic. "They're adapting," Reyes said grimly, her shoulder still bandaged. "Heavier armor. Wider burn zones. We're running out of places to hide." Jedediah didn't look up from treating Miko. "Then we make them more afraid of the jungle than they are of us. There's a massive nest of void widows 2 clicks east. We lure the next patrol straight into it." The others exchanged uneasy glances. Weaponizing the planet's deadliest predators felt like crossing a line. But lines had long since blurred. This was no longer war. It was survival at any cost. Under cover of darkness, Jedediah led a 3-person team to provoke the Void Widows, massive spider-like horrors with neurotoxic venom. The creatures poured forth in a black, chittering tide when disturbed. The Nyrax patrol that chased the human decoys never stood a chance. Their agonized screams echoed for kilometers through the canopy. Yet something darker was growing. Captured comms intercepts revealed strange orders from Overlord Vexcral: secure the anchorage. Prevent awakening protocols at all costs. Not conquest language. Containment language. Miko had managed to partially decrypt an alien dataslate. The Nyrax weren't here for resources or territory. They had come because Viridia held something ancient and monstrous beneath its surface. Humanity's relentless guerrilla campaign was destabilizing the very seals keeping it imprisoned. That night, as the survivors rested uneasily, deep seismic tremors began shaking the cavern. Something massive stirred far below. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath in dread. Jedediah stared into the darkness, hand tightening around his rifle. Every victory felt heavier now. Every dead alien carried the terrible suspicion that they might be winning the wrong war. The jungle had become their greatest ally. But even the jungle might not be ready for what was waking up. The rain fell like needles, turning the crimson veil into a steaming nightmare. Jedediah Kane sprinted through the bioluminescent undergrowth, boots sinking into sucking mud, lungs burning with every desperate breath. Alien hunter-killer drones screamed overhead, their red search beams slicing through the downpour like blades. "Split up," he gasped into his comm riz, "with me. 3 survivors broke left into the thicker brush. He and Captain Elena Reyes veered right, plunging into the thorn labyrinth, a natural maze of venomous barbs and carnivorous flora that even the Nyrax feared. Behind them, elite Nyrax trackers crashed through the foliage, their heavy armor smashing vines and their glowing ocular clusters cutting the darkness. A drone locked onto their heat signature. Jedediah spun mid-stride and fired a flare round. The magnesium burst lit the canopy in blinding white, detonating the drone in a fireball that rained molten debris. But the trackers were too close now. Reyes took a glancing plasma bolt to the shoulder. The smell of burned flesh hit Jedediah like a punch. She screamed but kept running, teeth clenched against the agony. He dragged her into a narrow hollow beneath a massive elderroot tree, whose thick sap naturally masked their signatures. The Nyrax patrol thundered past, mandibles clicking, weapons humming. One paused mere feet away, sniffing the air with wet, sensory tendrils. Jedediah held his breath, combat knife ready in a white-knuckled grip. A single drop of Reyes' blood dripped onto a nearby sundew plant. The carnivorous flora reacted instantly, releasing a sweet pheromone cloud. Within seconds, a swarm of glass wasps erupted from their hive, tiny horrors with diamond-hard stingers and paralytic venom. The aliens never saw them coming. The swarm poured into armor gaps, injecting agony. Alien screams tore through the rain as warriors convulsed and collapsed, clawing at their own faces. Jedediah pressed a makeshift bandage to Reyes' wound, his hands slick with blood and sap. "We can't keep this up. They're learning our patterns." "They're fracturing too," she whispered through gritted teeth. "Intercepts show command arguments. Some want to burn the entire continent. Vexkral keeps refusing. He's hiding something." They limped back toward the cavern base under the cover of the storm. The survivors gathered around a small fire, faces gaunt and haunted. Miko, the teenage hacker, had been working on a captured data slate. What she revealed sent ice through every vein. "The Nyrax didn't come to conquer," Miko said quietly. "They're wardens. Viridia holds something they call the Devourer, an ancient parasitic intelligence buried deep beneath the crust. Their containment field is powered by the planet's magnetic core and biosphere. Our traps, our explosions, our seismic charges. We've been cracking the cage." Argument erupted immediately. Harlan, a burly ex-logger, slammed his fist against the wall. "This is your fault, Kane. Your Become the Jungle crusade is waking up something worse than these bugs." Jedediah stared at the flickering holographic images, nightmarish forms of writhing flesh, mouths, and stolen memories. "We were dead the moment they landed. At least now we know why they wanted us gone quietly." That night, they launched their boldest strike yet, infiltrating the main Nyrax water processor and poisoning it with concentrated bloomrot extract. The alien base descended into pandemonium as warriors writhed, vomiting ichor and firing blindly. Victory seemed within reach, until Vexkral's personal guard arrived. Larger, faster, armed with weapons that bent space itself. The ambush became a slaughter. Jedediah watched in horror as his friend Tomas dissolved into screaming particles, flesh unraveling at the molecular level. As they fled deeper into the jungle, the ground trembled violently. A low, psychic groan echoed through every mind. Something massive stirred far below. Reyes clutched her wounded shoulder, eyes wide with dread. "We're not just fighting aliens anymore, Jed. We're fighting time itself." Jedediah looked back at the burning base, jaw tight. The jungle, once their greatest ally, now felt like it was watching them with hungry, ancient eyes. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every whisper of leaves carried a warning. The blood in the canopy had only just begun to spill. Tremors rattled the cavern daily now. Dust and small stones rained from the ceiling as Jedediah hunched over the stolen Nyrax data core by the light of a flickering chemical lantern. The deeper they dug into the files, the worse the truth became. The Devourer wasn't merely a monster. It was a planet-scale parasitic intelligence that had consumed 3 entire star systems before the Nyrax imprisoned it here 10,000 years ago. Viridia's unique biosphere and magnetic field served as a living lock. Every human explosive, every deep-rooted trap, every seismic disturbance had weakened those ancient seals. Overlord Vexgrowl's voice suddenly crackled across an open channel, translated in cold, primitives of Viridia. You fight what you cannot comprehend. Cease your defiance immediately, or you will birth a hunger that will devour your species and every world you touch. The survivors gathered in tense silence, faces pale. Trust was fracturing under the weight of fear. Harlan turned on Jedediah with burning eyes. We should have tried negotiating from the start. Now look what you've done. We were never offered negotiation, Jedediah shot back, voice sharp. They came to exterminate us quietly and keep their secret. At least now we're making them bleed for it. Reyes, arms still in a sling, stood unsteadily beside him. But doubt clouded her expression. What if he's right, Jed? What if we're the villains here? They had no choice but to push forward. Intelligence pointed to the Whispering Hollow, a forbidden zone where alien monoliths pulsed with fading containment energy. The jungle there was unnaturally silent. No birds. No insects. Even the plants seemed to lean away from a massive central sinkhole that breathed cold, oily vapor. Inside a half-destroyed Nyrax research outpost at the edge of the hollow, they found the final logs. The Ascendancy weren't conquerors by nature. They were eternal wardens, rotating cursed duty across centuries, sacrificing their own to keep the Devourer asleep. Humanity's stubborn guerrilla resistance had become the greatest threat the cage had faced in millennia. As the team prepared to withdraw with the data, the ground split with a deafening crack. A thick tendril of living shadow erupted from the sinkhole, glistening with teeth-like protrusions. It lashed out and wrapped around young Miko before anyone could react. She screamed as it dragged her toward the abyss, her body already distorting into impossible angles. Jedediah lunged, knife flashing, severing part of the tendril. Black ichor sprayed like acid, burning his skin. Reyes fired her rifle desperately. The tendril released Miko momentarily, long enough for Harlan to pull her back. But the cost was immediate. Harlan was snatched instead. His final transmission showed a glimpse of impossible geometry and endless, gnashing mouths before it cut to static. The survivors fled in terror, the psychic pressure of the awakening entity pressing against their minds like a vice, visions of devoured civilizations and endless hunger flooding their thoughts. Back at the base, the group was broken. Only 20 survivors remained. Miko, badly shaken, whispered, "It feeds on conflict. On defiance. Our war is making it stronger." Jedediah stood apart, staring into the jungle. The weight of every decision pressed on him like the planet's gravity. They had turned the jungle into a weapon, only to discover they might have armed something far worse than the Nyrax. Reyes approached slowly. "We need a new plan, Jed. We can't keep fighting both sides." He nodded grimly, but his eyes burned with desperate resolve. "Then we make sure that when the cage finally breaks, we're the ones holding the biggest knife." Deep below, the Devourer stirred again. Cracks spiderwebbed across its prison. The jungle held its breath, waiting for the moment it would finally scream. The sky over Viridia turned the color of a rotting bruise. Massive storm clouds twisted unnaturally as something colossal pushed against the fabric of reality from below. Jedediah Kane ran through a jungle that had gone completely mad. Trees writhed and twisted into screaming faces, their bark splitting open to reveal rows of teeth. The ground sprouted blinking eyes that wept black ichor, following every step he took. The Devourer was waking. Psychic pressure slammed into his skull like a hammer. Visions of devoured civilizations flooded his mind, worlds stripped bare, entire species reduced to memories swallowed inside an endless maw. He staggered but kept moving, rifle heavy in his hands. "Contact front." Reyes shouted, voice raw. A wave of shadow tendrils erupted from the earth, each one lined with crystalline teeth. Nyrax reinforcements fought desperately on two fronts now, their once dominant forces fracturing under the new horror. Jedediah's battered team, down to 15 survivors, ambushed a Nyrax supply column, only to find the aliens almost relieved to see human faces. A captured Nyrax lieutenant, armor cracked and leaking violet fluid, hissed through its mandibles, "Your stubbornness has done what nothing else could. The Devourer feeds on conflict. Your defiance is its favorite feast." Jedediah pressed his knife harder against the alien's throat. "Give me one reason not to gut you right here." "Because your planet is about to become the first course," the lieutenant gasped. "Then your species. Then everything." Dramatic proof came within minutes. A distant mountain exploded upward as a colossal limb of writhing flesh and jagged crystal burst forth, hundreds of meters tall. The Devourer's psychic scream ripped through every mind, human and Nyrax alike, dropping warriors to their knees in agony. Blood trickled from ears and noses. In the chaos, Jedediah made the impossible choice. Using captured Nyrax equipment, he opened a direct channel to Overlord Vexcral. The alien warlord appeared on the cracked holodisplay, his once imposing armor fractured and oozing. Multiple wounds leaked across his chitin. "So the ghost of the jungle finally speaks," Vexcral rumbled. "We need to reseal it," Jedediah said, voice steady despite the nightmare around them. "Together. Or we all die." Vexcral laughed bitterly, the sound like grinding stones. "Your kind never chooses restraint. But perhaps today you will surprise me." A fragile, desperate alliance was born in blood and terror. Human guerrillas guided the remaining Nyrax forces through hidden jungle paths that only they knew, paths laced with deadly flora that now seemed almost tame compared to the awakening horror. Together, they fought toward the primary containment pylon at the planet's equator. Every step was a nightmare. Tendrils snatched soldiers into impossible dimensions, their screams echoing even after their bodies vanished. Others went mad, turning weapons on their own allies as the Devourer whispered promises of power and eternity. The jungle itself fought against them now, vines lashing out with unnatural aggression. During one brutal clash, a massive tendril smashed down toward Jedediah. Reyes threw herself in front of him, firing her rifle desperately into the fleshy mass. The tendril impaled her instead. She looked at Jedediah with fading eyes as black ichor spread through her veins. "Make it count, Kane," she whispered, blood on her lips. "Don't let it win." Her death ignited something primal in Jedediah. He roared and led the combined force forward through the madness. Miko, pale but determined, worked frantically on a portable uplink to reactivate the failing containment codes. As they neared the equatorial spire, the Devourer's true form began to emerge, a mountainous nightmare of mouths, stolen eyes, and biomechanical horror that blotted out the sun. The air itself tasted of copper and despair. Vexcral fought beside Jedediah, distortion cannon blazing. "Your species is terrifying," the Overlord admitted between shots. "You turned our prison into a battlefield and nearly broke eternity." For pride. Jedediah didn't answer. He was past words. The Alliance was their only hope now, and even that was fraying as the Devourer's influence grew stronger with every act of violence. The final pylon loomed ahead, cracked and bleeding ethereal energy. The endgame had begun. The equatorial spire rose like a broken god against the nightmare sky. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, leaking ethereal blue energy as the Devourer loomed above, a colossal horror of writhing flesh, countless eyes, and stolen memories from civilizations long erased. Its presence pressed down on reality itself. Jedediah Kane, covered in blood and ichor, stood with the last 11 human survivors and 24 remaining Nyrax warriors. The alliance was fragile, held together only by mutual terror. "Push the override sequence." Vexcral roared, firing his distortion cannon into a surging wave of shadow tendrils. The weapon tore holes through the Devourer's flesh, but new growth instantly replaced what was destroyed. Jedediah slammed a jury-rigged human explosive packed with concentrated bloomrot and seismic charges into the pylon's core while Miko desperately uploaded the reactivation codes from a battered dataslate. The ground convulsed violently. The Devourer unleashed a scream that tore at the fabric of sanity, forcing several warriors to their knees as noses bled and minds fractured. A gargantuan tendril smashed down. Vexcral shoved Jedediah aside at the last second and took the blow himself. The impalement lifted the Overlord into the air. As dark ichor poured from his body, Vexcral activated a final failsafe on his gauntlet with trembling claws. "Tell your people," he gasped, ocular clusters dimming, "we never wanted this war. We only wanted silence." The pylons surged with renewed power. Ancient containment fields snapped back into place with thunderous force. The Devourer howled in fury as invisible chains dragged its colossal form back into the depths. The planet itself seemed to scream in protest, trees bending, ground splitting, before an eerie, heavy silence finally fell. When the dust and spores settled, only 4 humans remained standing. Jedediah Kane stared at the surviving Nyrax, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The lead alien regarded him with weary, cracked oculars. "Your species is terrifying. You turned a prison into a battlefield and nearly broke eternity for the sake of defiance." Jedediah extended a bloody hand. "We protect what's ours, even when we don't fully understand it." The Nyrax did not take the offered hand. Instead, their remaining forces began a slow withdrawal toward their battered landing craft. "We will leave this world. The cage holds. For now. But know this, human. The Devourer remembers you. And it is very patient." As the last Nyrax ships ascended into the bruised sky, Jedediah stood among the smoking ruins. The jungle slowly began to heal around him. New growth pushed through the carnage, though its whispers now carried darker, ancient notes. The air still tasted faintly of blood and ozone. Miko approached, supporting a wounded survivor. "We did it," she whispered. "They're gone." Jedediah looked out over the transformed landscape. "We survived. We taught them that humanity doesn't break easily." They expected easy conquest. Instead, they met ghosts in the jungle. They met a species that could turn an entire planet into a weapon. And in doing so, humanity had stared into cosmic horror and refused to look away. Years later, the survivors would tell the story around flickering fires, how a xenobotanist named Jedediah Kane and a handful of defiant souls held back both alien invaders and an ancient devourer. Viridia would never be the same. Its jungles now grew with sharper teeth and deeper shadows. But they were free. And somewhere far below the surface, in its cracked and weakened prison, the devourer waited. It had learned the taste of human defiance. And it hungered for more. Subscribe.